A shape in Mamba is a method of manually drawing an area either for cutting out using the alpha channel or for color correcting. Every instance within Mamba, whether that's an effect or a clip, can have a shape drawn on it. And in every case except one, that shape will then modify the alpha channel on the output of that effect or clip. The one exception is the color corrector, where when you draw a shape, it doesn't necessarily affect the output alpha channel, but rather it defines an area which a particular layer of the color corrector will access. To access shapes, we simply select an instance and go to Controls. Quite often Shapes is the default tab. So very simply, to create a shape, we would just click and drag our shape in, middle mouse button to finish, and then if we look at the alpha channel, we can see we've created a mat. So let's just look at that process in more detail. To create a shape, there's a few things we consider. The first is what happens to any alpha channel that already exists. So at the moment this is set to clear any incoming alpha channel. The next thing is to consider when we draw a shape, what is it going to do to the alpha channel? In this case it's going to add to it. So to create a shape, start by clicking here, and then we can put down points in the shape just by clicking the left mouse button. And you can see that just with a click this is making sharp tangents. On the other hand, if I click down but keep the left button pressed and then drag, I can also, as I go, set the tangents. So that can speed me up in terms of making shapes with as few points as possible. To close a shape, we just press the middle mouse button, or of course equivalent pen buttons. So we now have a shape, and that shape has affected the alpha channel. The individual points of a shape can all be modified, obviously just by clicking and dragging. They can also have their types changed. As we were drawing our shape, I showed the click and drag to change the tangents. That's optional. If you don't like that behavior, then you can preset the type of control point that's inserted as you go. But in any case, you can change the control points by simply selecting one or many and changing them here. We can select points either by left clicking, or we can lasso drag to select multiple points, or we can double click any point on a shape to select the entire shape. We can also change the softness of the edge of the mat using the width and offset here. If I click and drag width, then we'll see that the shape has started to get some softness. And using the offset, we can choose whether that offset is to the outside of the shape or to the inside of the shape. We can control this on a point-by-point basis. So if a point is set to have tangents, as this is, then apart from the tangents for the shape itself, there's also tangents for the softness. So you have a great deal of control over the softness of the edges. There are also options down here to reset any characteristics of the control points. In terms of animating our shape, there are two levels of motion for a shape. Using the normal key graph here, we can set and animate positions and size and rotation, and animate them on this graph as we would with any other parameter. This also gives a place to apply tracking information if we wanted to apply data from the feature tracker. But in addition, shapes have a second level of motion, which is actually within the shape itself. And that's controlled by this auto key down here. Notice that this auto key relates to the graph, as we've seen before, whereas this auto key relates to the shape. So to add a keyframe, we can either make a change to the shape with auto key on, or we can explicitly add a key. So for example, to make an animation of this point from here to here, it is simply that. And so it's key to understand that this animation is different to the animation that's on the curve. So for example, if I auto key on here and place this starting here and ending here, we can see we've got the two different animations going on. The change in the X position is done on the keyframe graph, and the change in shape is done on the animation of the points. We can have any number of shapes added to an instance, and how the shapes interact is set here. So for example, if I now create a second shape, We can see at the moment, because this is on add, that both of the shapes build a combined alpha. Alternatively, if I change this to subtract, then we can see it's now a blockout because it's subtracting from the alpha. Or alternatively, we could use intersect or add inverted. So in this case, the alpha fill is actually outside the shape rather than inside the shape. We can also change the priority. So at the moment, you can see that this shape is effectively underneath this one because this one's causing the subtract. Each shape has a number. This one's shape 2, this shape 3. The reason there isn't a shape 1 is that was the one that I first drew and then deleted. So I can change the priorities of these shapes. So if I double click to select a particular shape, I can then move its priority forward and backward here, so you can see the numbers changing. And then also there is the ability to cut and copy shapes between different instances. Shapes can also work with an incoming alpha channel, and so we can use them to perhaps provide garbage mats for keying processes that we've previously done. So for example, if I go back to this shot and I'll just insert a very rough RGB key. So let's just get at the brightest detail in that shot. You'll note that our previous shapes aren't now having an effect, and that's because the shapes are on this layer and the alpha channel is being redefined by this effect. So if we wanted these shapes to have anything to do with this alpha channel, they need to be on here. So for example, if we wanted to fill in this area to make this a better matte, then we could simply go to shapes. But in this instance, we don't want to clear our input alpha because that would destroy the alpha channel that we've already partially created. What we actually want to do is keep. But as you can see, there's options to completely fill it or invert it. So with keep and add, I can now garbage matte this area. And likewise, adding in a subtracted version. Something like that to finish the matte. If we look closely at this entity, we can see two little icons. The star tells us that, in fact, if I turn off the image, it's clearer to see. There's a little star icon and a little squiggly icon. The star icon is telling us that some of the parameters of this effect have changed, so it is doing something to the image. The little squiggly thing is telling us that there's a shape, so it makes it a little easier for us to see which entities have shapes and which don't.